Welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. I'm your host, Casey Garrett, and together we'll be discovering and learning from inspiring voices of healers, medicine keepers, and visionaries. Every episode, we'll explore the world of health, vibrant wellness, and natural medicine for a new era of human society. Welcome to today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Microdosing for Healing. And today I'm very excited to share time with three lovely people to focus on microdosing in the second stage of life. Today I'm joined by Heather Lee, Lauren Alderfer, and Cesar Marin. And one of the things I wanted to open with today is this has come up so often in my practice from the start, is people in the second half of life going, is it too late for me? Is it too late for me? And hopefully by the end of this conversation, you will absolutely unequivocally know it is never too late, ever too late to start this work and this journey. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Casey, so much for having us and opening up this conversation to that second generation, right? That over 50 crowd, those Generation Xers, who again are either have that stigma or don't have who to have that conversation with. So thank you so much for opening up. I love saying that we need to set buffet tables of wisdom to cultivate a better future. So thank you for setting this buffet table of wisdom.
My pleasure. I'd love for our listeners who are new to you guys, if you could share a little bit about your personal journey and what brought you initially to the mushrooms. I always love hearing people's personal stories because it's so informing of who you're here to support. So Heather, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I have been a licensed mental health professional for over 30 years. Yep, I'm definitely in that second half of life. And I think throughout my whole career as a therapist, I've always known it's not about something I'm doing or anything that I'm saying to help people heal. It's about helping people access their own inner wisdom. So my whole career has been about really exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness, whether that be dream work or shamanic journey work or breath work, guided imagery. So all those sort of things that help people access non-ordinary states has always been the biggest thing in my repertoire. So when the opportunity came up to study and become one of the first certified psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists, I jumped on it because I thought this speaks to me. And my own experiences with psilocybin began my freshman year of college in Colorado. I fell in with this lovely little tribe of hippie friends, but nobody was doing medicine as partying and drugs. It was always about taking them during the day out in nature, and it was very much based on spiritual exploration. We were all reading, Carlos Castaneda. So I sort of cut my teeth on this medicine as a path to awakening your own inner wisdom and connecting deeply with nature and spirituality. It's kind of how I landed where I am. Yeah.
Fantastic. Lauren, how about you?
Well, I would say, unlike so many in this space, and unlike a lot of assumptions when people know that I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers, I never did psychedelics as in my youth. Instead, at a very young age, I was actually initiated into meditation I think I was 12, the summer I was about to turn 13. So my path until very recently has been the path of meditation in inner contemplation. And at the tail end of COVID, I had my first high dose journey. And why did I even decide to do that? Well, I had been hearing about what Heather just described, that you can go into this different space of being. And it took me about 10 years before I really felt safe in terms of the set and setting and who is the guide, et cetera, et cetera. But that curiosity had been growing. And I will say that high dose journey with psilocybin was not really unfamiliar territory after really like decades of meditation practice and dipping into those states of non-duality. But from there, I ended up getting trained through the Microdosing Institute as just to really learn more for myself about microdosing after that high dose journey and trying to microdose on my own, and then becoming a coach to private clients. But what I found as someone who has really had that mindfulness approach to life, and I've written about it and I've taught mindfulness for many years, is that these medicines indeed can bring about some of the same states of being and levels of awareness in such in a quicker time frame than decades and decades and decades of practice. And so I do believe that the sacred use of plant medicines and psychedelics, whether it's particularly microdosing in my case, but also supporting those that hold space for higher doses, is really very supportive of what a mindfulness practice can be. So that's how I find myself in this space now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cesar.
Casey, I love how you set up the show, because the question that you posed was, is it too late? You know what I mean? Is this going to be too late? And my awakening and my introduction into psychedelics didn't happen until the age of 55. I was that person who was stigmatized that psychedelics were bad, that psychedelics were, for hippies, for people who wanted to trip, for people who wanted, and it was, for me, it was a recreational curiosity that dove me into the world of psychedelics. And real quickly, I realized that that there was a different realm. And it was funny because a lot of people talk about this calling, that the medicine, that the mushrooms, that they came at the exact moment when they need them. And for me, they did that. They came at exactly the right moment. I was a producer at CNN for 25 years, and microdosing and psilocybin and psychedelics came to my world right before I got laid off. So imagine I'm 25 years into a career at CNN, and all of a sudden my life is just going to take a huge, huge change. And it was through microdosing. It was through the intentional use, the responsible use, the safe use of psychedelics, through education, through educating myself. And I think that's a sort of first step in anyone who's curious about this, is that educational part, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about in this podcast. It was through that I realized that, wait a minute, hold on a second. Psychedelics aren't about, yes, they are about curiosity and fun and entertainment, but there's also a different component. And for me, through microdosing, I was able to change a lot of relationships with substances that I had. I was able to find this new creative aspect of myself. I was able to create a whole new, like literally reinvent my life at a pinnacle moment in my life through microdosing, through psychedelics. So what I've done now is I created an apparel brand to have open conversations about psychedelics. I have a platform called Microdosing Over 50, which talks to people over 50. We have honest, open, and objective conversations about psychedelics. And I've also become, a thought leader for people over 50, so that we can, talk about the fact that this isn't the psychedelics of the 60s. This isn't the psychedelics that our generation grew up with. This is the psychedelics of Johns Hopkins University, of NYU, of Harvard, of Stanford, of different institutions that are doing really wonderful work. And not just that, but also the underground that is doing wonderful work, and therapists who are doing wonderful work. So it's now becoming, that advocate for it, that person who creates and tries to set buffet tables of honest, open, and objective conversations about psychedelics. So that's how I find myself here, in the realm of psychedelics. Like I said, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I do guide people. I like to use the word better. Like I'm a spotter, right? I like to spot people on their microdosing journeys, because they have to do the work. They have to do the work. But it's through lived experiences, because everyone's experience is going to be different. So it's just my guide through my conversation of my lived experience of how these substances or these elements or molecules or drugs or whatever you want to call them have really changed my life and have the potential to change a lot of other people's lives.
Oh, beautiful. So beautiful. I want to highlight one thing that Cesar said that is very, very true for so many of my clients, so many people I see and support, is mushrooms found me just before my life was about to transform completely. There was no way I could have predicted it or planned it. But in hindsight, the mushrooms came in right at this time where they were going to be an ally with me and for me through the significant change that I was to make that was going to bring me onto my path, into my alignment. And I could not have done it so gracefully without them. So thank you for doing that. Beautiful. Yeah. Most of us here specialize in microdosing work, with the exception of Heather. So I would love to start with Heather for those folks who are listening. And I know a lot of our listeners actually are already practicing with mushrooms, and they would really love their parents. They would really, really love their parents to start microdosing and work with mushrooms. So Heather has significant experience with retreats and journey facilitation with people in the second stage of life. So Heather, I'd love to hand it over to you to talk about when you're working with older people, what are some of the common questions, concerns? What are some of the things that it would be helpful for them to know if they're just starting to explore?
Yeah. And, you had said earlier that, it's a myth that you could be too old, or that this could be hazardous to your health. Let me just, I just recently had an 80-year-old woman come on one of my retreats, and she flew in from Chicago, but she said to me, I've always been a card-carrying bohemian, but I've never done those mushrooms, but I'm feeling ready and I want to do it with you. So she came on a retreat. She had this giant, like a big journey on a high dose. She had 5 husbands in her life, and her journey was about sort of reviewing each and every one of those marriages and what the gift was and the wisdom and how it all made sense. But when she was done, she said to me, you're never too old for psychedelics because they're about your soul, and that's the immortal part. So that was so beautiful, right? And what I find with, the women that I work primarily with women, and I like to think that my retreats are really creating almost like a new rite of passage for women moving into the age of the sage, for us, like awakening our wisdom. It's such a wonderful medicine for sort of reviewing what's in there and letting go of what no longer serves you, kind of doing a little review so that you have more capacity for that next chapter. So, some of those things that we have to overcome as, we're all of sort of similar generation here, maybe with the exception of you, Casey, but is, what all those myths that were put out there, that this is dangerous and this is drugs. And, what I love to say to people is psilocybin is literally safer than anything in your bar or medicine cabinet. That is a fact. Mm-hmm. If I show you the safety profile of alcohol and other drugs, here's psilocybin, so safe. There's alcohol killing us in massive numbers. So safer than anything in your bar or medicine cabinet. And the other thing is, as humans, we spend about a third of our life asleep. Sleep is a non-ordinary state of consciousness when we're in a dream state. We as humans are designed to spend up to a third of our life in non-ordinary states of consciousness. We are designed to go there because that's where we make sense of all the stuff we encounter, figure out what drawer to put it in, make sense of it, so that we can heal. Just like when you get a cut, you don't have to look at it and go, grow skin, grow skin, grow skin. It just 2 weeks later, you can't tell where your cut was. We are designed to heal. And these non-ordinary states of consciousness are that mechanism for our psycho-spiritual and emotional healing. So those are sort of the things that I start out with, people that are interested. I think those are really good sort of baseline things to share with clients. But you're never too old for psychedelics. They're about your soul, and done in a really thoughtful, safe environment with skilled therapists, practitioners, facilitators. There's really almost only upside if it's done in the proper setting and with proper integration on the flip side. But to the piece about I want my mother to do it, I just recently journeyed Lisa Ling's mom. And so her mother's 78 and had significant trauma. And she had a very challenging journey. But we had done a lot of prep work. She was screened not only by me, but by an MD who I work with to screen. We did significant integration. So, and she was ready, and she came to the medicine ready and willing and wanting to do this medicine. So for people that say, I want my mother to do it, or I want to have my mother, people need to feel ready, called, and that it's their choice. There's no like saying, you need to do this, mom. It doesn't work that way. So I think that's also a really important piece, is that people feel called.
Wonderful. So important. One of the things connected to that, I think, is to emphasize the preparation piece. Because sometimes, especially I find working, the older a person is, the more conditioning they have. And the more conditioned they are in the pharmaceutical narrative than younger people might be. And so sometimes when people are hearing about it, it's through the lens of the research and the medical community. And they're kind of apples to apples, thinking it's going to be like a pharmaceutical experience when and you dip into this work, you find it's the total opposite of that. And so really at the outset, I think the older someone is, I really, really double down on the education and the reorientation and the framing. And let's take a long runway to build up to this work. So not only are you ready for the journey itself, your mindset has shifted as you step into this work, that you are really doing soul work.
And if I may, Casey, I think you point to something that I find helps with my microdosing clients that I mentor one-on-one, is that they might come with some of that fear. They may not be as ready, but they've heard so much about these higher dose journeys. And when they become more familiar with, say, mushrooms and their innate intelligence and the way they work through microdosing, oftentimes that's a really important piece in preparation, because then they're familiar with the mushrooms. And then they're saying, oh, yeah, I want to go further. I want to meet them at this higher level of, dosing.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a couple of things there. One, Heather, I've seen some of the promos with Lisa and the journey for her mom, and how you guys are going to do these things on Wednesday. So that's amazing. And it's awesome that we have someone like her, someone who's in the public eye, someone who's a household name, who's having these honest conversations. So I think that's awesome. But you're absolutely correct where the fear is real. The fear in that generation, that those people in their 70s or 80s. Like I look at my mom, and my mom, again, right from the start, when I told her, and if people know me, they've heard me talk about, my past relationship with cannabis. It was a really just toxic, bad relationship that I had with cannabis. And when I tell my mother, hey, I'm going to start to use psychedelics to overcome my dependency to cannabis, and she literally blew a gasket. She was like, are you crazy? Like, have you smoked that much weed that you think that's the solution? Like, come on. And then a month later, when she sees, wait a minute, hold on a second, he's completely changed his life. He's talking differently. He's acting differently. He's more present. He's more awake. He's more empathetic, and it's funny because if you've heard the story, she bought me this pendant in Colombia. This mushroom pendant. She hands it to me and she says, I'm so proud of what you're doing. So she's seen the change and she's seen it firsthand. But for me to try to not even convince her, because I'm a big proponent in having conversations, not making recommendations. And I love that Heather talked about that it's, if you're not really called to this, there's no reason why I should say, you should do this. You should do this. No, I'm not. Why should I do this? Or if we're having conversations, hey, I knew someone that was in the situation that you were, and this is how they used microdosing to overcome that challenge. That's a different situation, and you should do this. So, as much as my mom has seen the change, for her to say, hey, mom, let me put you on a microdosing protocol. I'm growing these mushrooms myself, so there's no one else touching these. I'm going to dose you exactly, on a good dosage. That to her is foreign compared to going to a pharmacy and getting some opaque bottle because some doctor has said, this is what you should take. And when she asked, what do I have? He's like, I don't know what you have, but just take these pills. That to them is okay. So that fear, that stigma is for real. So that's why it's important, like Casey said, that we show the science, that we can say, hey, you know what? Look, right now, worldwide, there's over 650 studies being done to help human conditions through psychedelics, right? I think that's our real armament. That and people's conversations, right? When they hear that story of Lisa's mom and how she was able to overcome their trauma, when they hear a testimonial of one of Lauren's, clients who says, yeah, you know what, through microdosing, I was able to sort of just really live in the present. That's what really changes people's mind. That's because the stigma that's been programmed for so long is real, is incredibly real.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. So one of the things I've noticed when working with people at midlife, heading into their second stage of life, women moving into menopause, people moving into their midlife crisis, we catch them in that wave. It's really this time of beautiful reckoning, of healing opportunity. We tend to focus on kind of the symptoms of that time, but I have found it's such a beautiful portal for spiritual opening and for tremendous healing that doesn't come in any other time of life. It's a real rite of passage time. So, Cesar, let's start with you. Like when you have people over 50 approaching you for microdosing, what are some of the common things that they're sharing with you that have prompted them to step forward to medicine practice?
I think there's this sense with people that once you turn 50 and you really look at it, you go, okay, there's 50 years behind me. There's not 50 in front, right? And a lot of people get stuck there. They get stuck in the sense of, okay, it's almost over then. Like off this back. Instead of thinking, wait a minute, every day is a new day. Every day is a new possibility to have clear thoughts, to have a clearer mind, so a lot of people that I talk to, that I work with, it's that sense of I'm stuck, right? I'm going through that midlife, on age set depression. My kids have moved away. I'm getting divorced. I've lost my job. It's this transition at a real pinnacle time of life, because you're like, okay, wait a minute. Is it over? Is it starting? Where am I? Where am I going? And for me, what microdosing really did, and what psychedelics have really taught me, is that the only real moment that exists is this present moment. This moment right now. 5 seconds ago, that's never coming back. 10 seconds from now, that's not guaranteed, right? So with me, when I work with people, it's really using the most practical intention to use these medicines, because as we all know, without intentions, why even, right? Why even? So if the intentionality is to really live in that present moment, to live right now, to know that the past is just an open door to depression, that the future is just an open door to anxiety, that if we can really live in that present moment, no matter what age, that whether there's 2 years left, 12 years left, 22 years left, that we live this present moment, that's what I really hope that people are able to do through psychedelics, right? Through microdosing, whether it's like I said, a good microdosing protocol, or through a macrodosing experience with a good therapist, with a good guide. It's being able to sort of live in that present moment and say, you know what, wait a minute, hold on a second. At this moment, I have everything I need. And when you live that way, then everything else seems a lot easier, especially, again, like I said, because at our age, at that over 50, there's so many challenges. There's so many things coming at us, that for me, it's just the importance of being that present, of, everything's happening right now at this moment. So for me, especially working with those people in that second stage, in that second part of life, it's, look, the more you can live in the present, the better your life is going to be.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Lauren, you have openly and just exquisitely, it amazes me, spoken and written about your journey supporting your husband with microdosing through his Alzheimer's journey. This is something that impacts so many people. We have so many people listening who are caring for loved ones. Can you share with us a little bit about that journey, how you decided to pursue that path, and any insights you can share with people who are in that position where they're wanting to support loved ones who are caregivers with microdosing?
Well, thank you, Casey. And really the thanks goes to my husband, Henry, who always worked in humanitarian work throughout his 50-year career. And when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a few years back, he said, I want my life to have purpose. And we listened to a workshop that Jim Fadiman was speaking at, and then we were in private communication with him, and it just inspired Henry. He said, you are doing so much for other people. And Henry said, I want my story to be shared. So I really give the credit to him. And yes, in fact, on my blog, I share every week there's something that comes up, and I'm sharing the journey, and I don't know what's going to unfold. But what I can say is I want to start with what Cesar just said. And I love that you just described mindfulness so beautifully. And so, as I had mentioned before, I came into this work through the lens of mindfulness, which has been my life. And one of the things I like to point out is that as we keep every day, no matter our age, I think what microdosing has helped, so many of my clients will say the same thing, is that there's this embodiment of that sense of mindfulness. And as someone said to me just yesterday, who's in her late 70s, she said, I'm still reaching my peak. I mean, there's this sense that you can still keep, you're becoming more of who you are. And as you mentioned before, Heather, it's like, it's the soul work. It's not chronological. So that never ends. So that was really how as I started in the work. But once my husband was diagnosed and he wanted his story to really be shared so that we can all learn, because the microdosing has been helping him so much. And then it took me probably another year or two to realize that when you talk about any kind of dementia, you have to also include the caregiver. Because it's a team effort. And also when we're talking about, usually when we're talking about dementia, unfortunately, people can be quite young when they are diagnosed, is that we're talking about a team approach. And most of the people with dementia might be older and not accessing a lot of the ways that we learn about microdosing, which is through social media. So really, I'm reaching out to the children of those people and then they can go to people like Cesar and me to find out more. And I'm really happy to say that I have just put on my blog, and it's in some of my social medias, a very specific protocol specifically for people with mild or moderate cognitive impairment. It's the protocol that my husband is following. And then next week, I'm working on an assessment and my husband's actually helping me with this. So it's in tandem with him to come out with ways that microdosing have specifically helped him so that you can measure that. Whether you are microdosing or not, or following the microdosing protocol that I'm offering, the way to look at it is going to be helpful to do what? Alzheimer's, in my husband's case, is not curable. But at the end of the day, I think this discussion and the idea of high dose or microdosing is we're getting at something much more subtle. And that is, and we're all talking about fear. And I think that fear comes up even more as people get older. And the fear of mortality, the fear of what's going to happen. And also I see this big area of not being reconciled with your life or where you're headed. And so I believe that what microdosing can really help do is ease a lot of those questions and get people to connect more to their heart in a way that is at ease and it is prepared and is open to accept and to be open to whatever is happening. So that has been how I've seen microdosing help. At the same time, for people with dementia, some of the things that we're looking at that will be available next week, because I'm still just polishing it up, is sense, for instance, sense of self, sense of well-being, which is like emotional safety, physical safety, in the case of dementia, ability to do multi-step tasks. So it gets specific, but also less anxiety, less depression. Are we seeing these things? So those are just some examples. But basically, I keep sharing as my journey grows. And then I just did that protocol that I was working on for the last few weeks to actually make it, public and publishable. And I've spoken with Jordan Gruber, who's in communication with Jim Fadiman, to really feel like, is this something that we should go forward with? And now I'm really excited because I think the next thing is I'm going to do a protocol for caregivers because, again, I believe, and in a nutshell, well, I don't want to take up too much time, but in a nutshell, the protocol for dementia is an everyday protocol as opposed to taking a break. And then I give my reasons for that if you check out the blog, or I'm happy, to send more information to you for those that are listening. And but for caregivers, I see lowest effective dose, but then every once in a while, the highest effective dose, because as a caregiver myself, I can't really travel, but I need that deeper wisdom. I need the nourishment that a slightly higher dose. I call it a mini retreat day when I do something like this, but it's only for a few hours, that I can very gently go deeper without having a high dose. So I think that we're developing these protocols not just for dementia, not just for caregivers, but we're seeing it for cluster headaches. We're seeing it for ADHD. We're seeing it for autism. So this is where I happen to be from mindfulness, bringing that into the stage of elderly care and dementia.
Love it. Thank you so much. Heather, I'd love to ask you about people who are in recovery or have a current case of cancer diagnosis. So I know that you have worked with a lot. There's a lot of, I get that a lot, like, am I allowed to microdose or journey when I have an active cancer diagnosis when I'm going through treatment? So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, but I first have to give a little shout out to all of us, because it's so fun that we're kind of on the front end of this, right? I mean, this is still early days. And I also, like, my favorite thing that I'm leaning into these days is being a late bloomer. You know, I'm like in my 60s and I'm just hitting my stride, and I give a lot of credit to the mushrooms for that. But so, Laura, developing some fabulous stuff that you're on the front edge of, and it's just, all of this makes my little heart I get so excited. It's such good stuff. So in my case, so I do a lot of work with women with cancer. And the way that came about is, so I did I was in the very first cohort of a certification training to become a certified psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. And it was a really intense year-long training with people from Johns Hopkins, NYU, London Imperial. And at the end of that year-long training, my husband and I had made this plan to hop in our Sprinter van. We have a Sprinter van, and just like go off for a few months traveling to sort of celebrate before I came back and launched into this new career. And so being the responsible adult I am, I'm like, okay, so I should probably go to the dentist and get these things out of the way, go get my mammogram. So on Monday, I received my certification as a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. On Wednesday, I received a phone call saying I have breast cancer. So this was one of those things in life where I'm like, okay, that's like not a coincidence. This is things lining up. I mean, I felt that in my soul. It's like, this is something I'm supposed to look into. So with that, I get off the phone, and it felt like within hours, I went upstairs and did a 5-gram journey in my home. And you talk about dancing with the devil and facing your mortality. I didn't know if I was coming or going. My mother had died of breast cancer about 14 years earlier. But that journey gave me this download of information about that my cancer was fear turned cellular. It wasn't just my fear, it was intergenerational. It was fear-based patterns of thinking around men and money, which made a hell of a lot of sense to me. And that, it was like, I sort of was told, look, you need to attend to these fear-based patterns of thinking because they're impacting your immune system. So I felt so armed with and empowered with what I could be doing. I knew the doctors could. I had a full double mastectomy. I wasn't going to mess around. I'm like, let's just get that done. Scheduled an appointment for that. It was about 3 weeks down the road. And I also got this message that I was supposed to go into the wilderness, find healing water, and bathe my body to prepare for all these surgeries. So we hopped in our van. Crazy things happened, and we ended up at this waterfall in the middle of the wilderness, coming into this crystal blue pool. Nobody was around. I stripped down naked, prepared my body. Anyway, those things really informed how I walked through my cancer experience. I had this spiritual perspective on it. I had this empowered sense of what I could be doing to attend to sort of the psycho-spiritual energetic component of my dis-ease. And so now every year I try to offer one free retreat for women with cancer, and not only women with, that maybe have had cancer and it's in the rearview mirror, but you still have that little voice saying, might it come back? But also, I would really like to help pioneer the use of this medicine really early in a diagnosis, much like I did, or with any dis-ease diagnosis, because I think it's a way we can access a lot of mind, body, spirit information that is readily available. Our bodies are so they know, we have that. So that's kind of where I'm at with, just really trying to bring this medicine to women on cancer journeys, whether it's early, middle, late. And I had the good fortune of, I just had a documentary done on a retreat I ran for 3 women with cancer. And this documentarian filmed the whole thing. And it's now a half-hour beautiful documentary that is so soulful and beautiful. Like, it's this beautiful little piece of film artwork, but additionally just creates this wonderful backdrop to have these conversations. And again, where I feel my strength is right now is just getting out and sparking the conversations and getting people talking and doing the education and expanding all of our, knowledge and conversations around these medicines.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you. Cesar, one thing I have noticed, and this was certainly my experience and your experience too, is the medicine meeting you at this time where your life is about to change and transition. And I feel like this is so up with the 50, 60 somethings that I've been working with the backdrop of the world, of the climate, of where the United States is right now. This year, I think a lot of people are going to come to define this year as like my life before 2026 and my life after 2026, because our society is like unrecognizable, by the day. So I'd love for you to share in your own experience, like, how does psilocybin and mushrooms help you work with uncertainty?
That's a great question. And I came from a world of just being hyper vigilant news-wise, because working at CNN, you were plugged in 24/7. You had to be from the moment you woke up to the moment you fell asleep. And now being out of that world, but still being tapped in because, I want to know what's going on. I think that at least for me, microdosing has given me a sense of, okay, what can I do? What can I do? Yes, the world is falling apart, right? But around me, what can I control? What can I do? And sometimes it just comes down to doing what we're doing, right? Like, I look at Lauren, and it's, there's these situations where if we literally have to wait for either a pharmaceutical or bigger programming to talk about what we could do with Alzheimer's and psychedelics, we're going to be dead. We're going to be here, right? So when we take it upon ourselves, that I go back to the same thing. When I started working in mass media, you literally needed a television studio, and you needed cameras, and you needed a director, and you needed a control room, and you needed a satellite, and you needed some broadcast station to get your message out. Now all you literally need is a phone, right, to document what you do. So I think that sometimes what we could do is, look, how many people are fearful of Alzheimer's and what's going on? And if they come across someone like Lauren and they're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on a second, there's hope. Or someone that gets a cancer diagnosis and they come across someone like Heather, and they could sort of bring down sometimes that anxiety that exists because of this hyper-programmed world that we're in. Right, that it's sort of that Alzheimer's, oh my God, it's bad, it's horrible. You know what I mean? What am I going to do? Cancer, oh my God, it's horrible, whatever. What are we going to do? Well, there's hope out there. There's hope. It's just really looking for it. And it's funny that we're finding some of this hope in something that's so stigmatized, right? That we're finding hope for people with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD, with cancer, with Alzheimer's, with eating disorders, right? With all these things that afflicted us and hurt us and scared us, that there is this potential to sort of have some hope. For me, that's where that message of hope, that if sometimes, yes, of course I could look at the news and go, oh my God, it's horrible, it's crazy, what are we going to do? What can I do? Like, what can I do? And how can I, share my experience of what I'm doing and how I'm living in the present moment? And the same way that Lauren's doing with her experience with her husband, and Heather's doing, with her experience with her clients and patients, and Casey with what you're doing, helping facilitate and teach people how to use these. I think that's where it comes. That's where we sort of break down the fear a little bit with what can I do? Like, what can I do? And for me, if something that psychedelics have done for me is empowering me in that, what can I do? where can I look? You know what I mean? What are the blind spots that maybe I'm not looking at that I can be present for and be, hold myself accountable for what I can do. So I think that for me, that's really what I've been able to do. And again, coming from that hyper plugged in, I'm still on back channels of CNN producers where if I sat there and read them, I'd literally go, oh my God, but we can only do what we can do. And I think that if we lead with hope, if we lead with love, if we lead with joy, if we lead with compassion, if we lead with empathy, if we lead with all these wonderful things that the mushrooms have taught the people that they've touched to do, you never hear of anybody taking some mushrooms and going robbing a bank. You never, I'm going to go do some mushrooms and commit a crime. I've never heard a story like that. So it's sort of, it's hopefully showing people that, yes, all of us have, if there's one common denominator that we all have, that we learned through these molecules, is it love. Love is so beautiful. I love everybody. I want to love even the people that I don't like because it makes me feel better. So that's really, it's for me, it's loving the situation that I'm in, no matter what. Even if the world is falling apart around us, I have to love it. Thank you. Beautiful. So all the people that are listening and go, okay, I am sold. I'm sold. I'm curious, but I'm taking all these medications. This is a really popular one, especially when you're working with people that are older. I'm sure we run across it all the time. I know I see it. And am I allowed? And with all of my medications. So I'd love to hear, to open up to any of you, share, like, how do you receive this? And for Heather, maybe Heather, you can start us off. I know one that I get a lot from older people is heart stuff, various heart stuff, because I think a lot of times people, because of information or misinformation sometimes that's out about psilocybin, people are extra concerned about heart conditions and medication. So Heather, we'll start with you.
Yeah. And I should probably start by saying I am not a medical MD type person. I'm a LCSW mental health person. So, but I do, a lot of clients that come to me have all sorts of different issues because of maybe being a little bit older and because of living in a culture where everybody's on some pharmaceutical thing. So, there are very few contraindications for psilocybin. It is a really, really, really safe plant medicine. That said, there are a few contraindications, but they're not these hard and fast rule outs when it comes to things like somebody's cardiac condition or medicine that they're on. So, it's a little more involved of a screening than just saying, oh, you have a heart condition, no way, or oh, you're on that medicine, no way. So I will just say, because I don't want to give out a lot of medical advice around this, but what I do and what I would say is that anybody who's looking to do this medicine, high dose, like what I work with, that person should be making sure that you are screened not only by them for the mental health screening, but I work with an MD who does a secondary screening and signs off for all of my clients because I am not an MD in that sense. So I guess mine is more of a cautionary tale that anybody that you're going to work with better be, if they're not having you screened for any medical conditions and for really understanding all the different medications that you're on, I would say keep looking and find somebody who really is going to do that screening, so that, because again, we do pretty much take that oath of first do no harm, even as the mental health professional. So that's sort of what I'll say to that. Thank you.
Lauren, Cesar, do you have any reflections?
I would echo what Heather's saying. If I would recommend someone if someone's interested in microdosing, I use some of the Buddhist principles. In the preparation stage, I love to have beginner's mind. Like, yes, be curious, but curiosity without discernment, to me, and I should say, sorry, not necessarily Buddhist principles, but they are, but mindfulness principles. But that curiosity, that beginner's mind, is matched with discernment. And the third piece of preparation is to cultivate an intention. So part of that discernment piece is if someone is going to be guiding or mentoring you through a microdosing experience, the first time you're microdosing, which is what I would always recommend, again, like Heather said, if that person really knows what they're doing, they will look over, they will have a screening. That screening will include your medications, and they will have a protocol around that, whether it's to work with your team of doctors or whether they have someone that they're in communication with that can look over your meds. But the person should know. So that's really, it pretty much matches what Heather's saying. I look at that as part of building mindfulness into what you're doing. It's not to go blind into something. And as you said, there are very few contraindications, but there are a few, and some of them aren't necessarily contraindications. Like if you have tinnitus, there's ways of working around tinnitus if you're microdosing, because that can come up if someone has tinnitus. So again, look for someone that really has some kind of screening that includes the medical and then knows something about that or what to do in order to make an informed decision.
And I was going to definitely say, have these conversations with your health practitioner, with your caregiver. Let them know, hey, I'm interested in microdosing. This is something that I've looked on. I've done my research. Go in informed. Go in informed. I've had people that say, yeah, I've talked to my practitioner, and they're like, what is that? What is psilocybin? What is microdosing? So you might have to educate your practitioner on what you're doing, but that's why you're paying them to be your caregiver. But that's an incredibly important conversation that you must have with your caregiver, because they're the ones that are prescribing whatever medication they're giving you. They're the ones that know the condition that you have. I know, like I said, I know that there's a lot of time that there are doctors out there that are just ready to give out medicine without really knowing what's going on. But we all have to take our healthcare into our own hands sometimes. But it's an important conversation to have with your health caregiver.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I would just love to add, one of the things I love about opening up these conversations with clients is a lot of times I find when people are microdosing, sometimes it's the first time they've ever sat down to reflect on their medications. We have a conversation about how they feel about their medications, what was going on in their life when they started the medication. Are they actually working? They didn't know there were all these side effects until sometimes years later when they start to work with mushrooms. So it's a really valuable prompt to start opening these conversations up. The other thing I'll say, we work with a lot of people in parts of the country. They're like, I can't go to my doctor about this. I'm not sure how they're going to react to it. There are psychedelic pharmacists in the space now. There are so many wonderful clinicians that are doing this work, come to specialize in this work. Dr. Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist, teaches in our microdosing facilitator training program. Dr. Kristen Spear, we've also had on the podcast before, so our listeners know her. Kristen developed this amazing tool called the Psychedelic Interaction Tracking Tool. It's at psychedelicinteraction.com. And that allows you to go in and put your medications in. Just for a few dollars, you can get a report, a cross-check, cross-reference with psilocybin with most of the medications out there. It's amazing. So there are these other resources. And then lastly, I'll say, especially in the last year, I have been shocked by how open healthcare professionals and doctors are toward microdosing and psilocybin journey work. It's really blown me away. Like, it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago, but in the last year, I work with a lot of people who are tapering and on various medications, and they have gone to their psychiatrist, their prescribing doctor, and almost all of them at this point have gone, oh, I support that. Let me know how it goes. Let me know how I can support. And I'd actually like to learn more about this process. So it's really, really, this whole topic has really changed and shifted. So yeah, thank you all. I'd love to open it up to all of you about protocols that you noticed, like when you are working with people who are older in years. Is there anything significant that you change in terms of the dosing itself or the protocols in any way? Lauren, let's start with you.
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think we're going to see more and more protocols. And as I wrote on my blog just this week, the protocol that I'm proposing is every day. So that's a bit controversial because there's an understanding that you always take a break. My feeling is that a break ends up happening anyhow with someone with dementia. Either you went to the doctor and you forgot to take it that day, or you went on a trip to see somebody for 5 days and you didn't take your microdosing with you. So in a way, there's a built-in break. But why do we take the breaks? The breaks we take because it's not because there's tolerance buildup. Some people will say that they do have that, but scientifically, that's not a fact. But what I have heard Jim Fadiman say is that microdosing, and we're talking about mushrooms here today, it's an immune builder, right? So you are just building your whole immune system. So at a certain point, I've heard him say, and in the training I had with him through the Microdosing Institute, was that there's a point where, like, if you take a break, you might say, hey, I'm really good. And I don't know if all of you and some of your clients, Casey and Cesar, will say, I took my break and I'm still feeling the mushrooms. I'm still feeling really good. I don't feel like I need to microdose. In fact, I feel like I'm microdosing, but I'm not. So part of what Jim has said is that your immune system has really improved so much that maybe you're good for a while. But in the case of dementia, and specifically in the case of Alzheimer's, it's not curable. We're not looking for, the immune system's going to be great. We're really, it's almost like asking you to have an attitude of palliative care. We're trying to make the journey softer, easier, more heart-centered, reconciled in your heart. And as Cesar was speaking so much about hope, it's yes, can you connect? Can you connect to that deeper place in you of well-being? Can you connect to the place in you that's just heart opening? So back to the protocol, what we've seen success with my husband is that he's really doing a dose every single day. And that seems to help. And the breaks kind of happen naturally. I put it in and I took it out at the last minute, but I actually see this protocol as a really good protocol for people who are aging. Maybe not in their 50s, but maybe in their 60s or 70s or beyond, is that why not every day? And part of the reason why I mention every day is because it's really hard to keep track. It's hard, especially if you have a cognitive impairment. It's like, was it 2 days? Did I take it yesterday? Oh, I have another. It's like, no, that's like two. that just increases the problem. And but also for the caregiver, like caregiving is hard work. It's 24/7. And it's like, oh, is it this? So anything that's continual is just so much easier. And I see that a lot of my clients that don't have dementia, I put them on this protocol. And oftentimes it will be the lowest effective dose. I also have not put this in publicly, but I'm really starting to really contemplate that if someone has this mild or moderate cognitive impairment, such as in Alzheimer's, and what I'm doing with my husband is trying to give him the highest effective dose within microdosing. Why? Because if he's functioning well, we're talking, I'm assuming most of your listeners understand that microdosing means that you're functioning completely, perfectly well in your daily activities, whether it's driving, which my husband has not done for quite a while and will never do again, but you're performing all your tasks normally. So if you can do the highest effective dose, you're getting more of that neuroplasticity, you're getting more of the anti-inflammatory effects, you're getting more of the neurogenesis that mushrooms give us, as well as other psychedelics. So I'm starting to play around with that as well. So I see that as a really, really helpful protocol for aging in general, and also for staving off or slowing down decline.
Wonderful. Yeah. Cesar or Heather, do you guys have any reflections?
I think, like with everything, or with most things, microdosing, it's real. The first question is, what are the intentions, right? What when I work with people, that's always the first question. Well, what are your intentions? Where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be 6 weeks from now? When we finish that first cycle, that first protocol, where do we see yourself, right? So for someone who's in their 50s, who is a mid-level manager, who wants to be more focused, who wants to be more tuned, does a 4-day on, 3 days off work better for them? And I really think that the only way you figure that out is through citizen science, right? Dr. James Fadiman is a big proponent of that, right? Whether it's, someone in their 60s who's having problems sleeping, right? And maybe microdosing at night might help them to sort of calm down, the brain activity and be able to sleep. Or whether it's someone in their 70s whose intention is, I just want to live a calmer life without having to worry about my kids and worry about this and worry about that. So I think that it's really, once we know what the person's intention is to microdose, what they are looking for, then it's easier to sort of, put together a protocol that's best going to work for them through doing that citizen science.
I just want to add to what Cesar is saying. In my book, Mindful Microdosing, Guidebook and Journal, what I do, like what Cesar is saying, as you consider it, is like, what's the best rhythm that suits you? And I think that's what you're pointing to, Cesar.
Correct.
You start with the ad intention. That's part of preparation. And then, what works for you? Why are you doing this? But then it's not like, I have to follow this protocol, but like, what's the rhythm that works for my life, matched with my intention? And I think I'm assuming we would all agree that microdosing becomes very individualized and nuanced. So you might start with a very specific protocol, but then it starts to be nuanced. Are you taking it at night? Are you taking it in the morning? Are you doing it every day? Or, so it's nice to start with a protocol, but then always be open to making those little changes along the way, because it's a very mindful practice in itself. We're always reflecting on what's happening. We're always observant. We're always checking in. We're always really living from our intention and seeing what's happening. So it's a different process than taking a pharmaceutical and popping it in, but it's a process that you build a relationship with how the rhythm that you're taking it, with what you're ingesting, even the variety of mushroom, if you're taking mushrooms, etc.
Wonderful. Heather?
Yeah, I would just build on it to go back to, when you were saying sometimes for people with the pharmaceuticals, I've never really stopped to think about what they're on or what. This is so different. We're building a relationship with the mushroom, and the mushroom is quite likely a sentient being, right? This is not a plant or an animal. It's a kingdom unto itself, but it's very different. We are working with the medicine. We're not just popping a pill. And I think the piece that comes up for me, so I do high dose journey work, right? So people are taking high doses and being behind eye shades and with music and 4 to 6 hours in this journey space. What I always say is it is not an exact science. There is not a formulaic table I look at and know how to dose people. There are so many factors that go into it. Part of it, intention. What are they looking for? What's their life history with non-ordinary states? How do they respond to alcohol and other drugs? Are they on anything? Have they been on something? Maybe years? There's so many factors. And I have to say, there's a whole piece that's very kind of intuitive about how I come up with dosing for people. I will have a number in my head the day before, and I swear to God, I go to sleep on it. And in the morning, sometimes it comes to me, no, they don't need 5, give them 3. And so I feel like I'm working with the mushrooms here, and that might sound kind of hippy dippy, but when you start working with the mushrooms, this is how you talk and think. But so there's a trust piece, there's an intuitive piece. It is not an exact science. And we all do the best we can with these things. And it's in collaboration with the client, with the mushrooms, and with the goals.
So well said. Absolutely. Ditto.
I was going to say, I love what Heather was talking about, in the sense of we have the society that will take things without even thinking about them, right? Whereas we're having them work with these natural things and telling them that with intentions is how they work the best, right? Where it's like doctors are just saying, just drop these pills and you'll be fine, to sort of save yourself. And it's like, that's not the way this works. And that's not, I'm a big believer, the people that I've worked with that do have intentions, that do have intentionality to use these medicines and do say, okay, well, I'm giving myself consent to ingest something that might change the way I feel, the way I think, the way I act, the way I react, right? As compared to things that, people don't even think about. And unconsciously, they're just like, okay, but like Heather said, they don't think about how their body's going to react, how their health is going to react, how their spirituality is going to react, how their emotions are going to react. So it's very interesting how with these medicines, with these things that the earth has given us, we sort of have to almost walk these fine lines, but yet, the medical industry is just ready to shove out, whatever they have on hand.
Well, I would venture to say, and we won't go down this rabbit hole, but you could go down the rabbit hole. This really goes into neuroscience and quantum physics, really. I mean, we really are dealing with things that are so beyond what we even have language to really speak about. But when we're working with these medicines and we're going into these psycho-spiritual realms, I mean, there's the telomere hypothesis, and I'm using big words and I hardly know what the hell I'm saying, but but that they're starting to find that there's certain gene expression that happens that's triggered by what happens on a psilocybin experience, because that is such a real experience to us that it can actually impact how certain genetic coding unfolds. So I sort of know what I'm saying enough to say it and sort of understand it, but there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down with neuroscience, quantum physics, and psychedelics.
Oh, our listeners are right there with you.
Let's go. Let's have a podcast just on that.
They're with you in that rabbit hole. Yeah. And we just had a hilarious experience just yesterday in our guide group, where one of the guides brought forth that a client came to her and she had gone out on her own and worked with a microdosing company that was dosing people, that was prescribing protocols using AI. And they had her, the AI robot had her taking 600 milligrams of penis envy, which was not correct for those of you who are new to microdosing. That's very, very far from a microdose, and would not have been suitable in any way for this particular client profile. And so it just really brought home, we were sharing about it in our guide thread, of how important guidance is in this role, and also the human intuition in protocol. It's like the first couple of weeks I'm working with someone, a lot of our focus is around finding their sweet spot and tapping into their intuition and connecting them to the medicine for the first time. It's kind of like, I always often describe it like, take your time, because this is going to be like when you meet a soulmate. Those handful of times in life where you meet someone and you're like, I know you. It's like that. And so take your time, and really the first couple of weeks, just ease into it and give yourself time to feel it out. And lots of time, as Heather said, like, so you'll dream about it. Your guide will come through. Your guide that you're working with will have a clear intuition about where to work. So that's how I encourage you to approach it.
I love what you're saying, because that builds into my approach, which is a mindful approach. So I support mindful microdosing, is what you're describing, because if you're building a practice in mindfulness, you don't just rush to the top of the mountain. You take your steps, you get guidance, you get familiar with what you're doing. So I also feel like if you haven't microdosed and it's your first time, then what's the hurry? If it takes 1 week or 3 weeks to find that, I call it a sweet zone. I try to find like an area that's the sweet spot, but at any rate, basically the sweet spot or sweet zone. But at the same time, you're learning how to measure. You're developing that relationship with the mushrooms, if we're talking about mushrooms, and you're tuning into your intention. You're tuning into your heart. You're starting a ritual, and all those things are equally important. As you're saying, Heather, it's like not the pharmaceutical. It goes way beyond that, right? It's asking us to have this relational understanding and living in it. So I like that it takes a little longer. It gets us out of our Western mentality of like, I take it and then it'll fix me or it'll change me instantly. It's like, no, this is a process. This is a relationship. So as we build the familiarity with it, while we're looking for that sweet spot or that sweet zone, we're also building in this other sense, this other way of being, in which I would like to call it mindfulness, but it can be really anything. It's the experience, whatever you call it. So I love this, slow, intentional, and that's where you really are building your foundation of having your microdosing experience be very different than just popping something into your mouth without really thinking, and not being connected to your heart or that quantum area of non-specific understanding,
Beautifully said. Yes. I'll reflect in terms of protocol and dosing. One pattern that I have seen that's been pretty reliable is if I have someone, a man who is, say, over 70, 75, usually, I'm looking at their level of emotional repression in their life, and also how long they've been on medications. Also sleeping medications in particular. I was shocked in across my healing career, whether it was early in my career when I was working with clients doing body work to now with microdosing, how many men over 50 that need to drug themselves to sleep at night. It is shocking, the percentage of men that are on sleeping pills, the Ambiens, the Trazodones. And so that comes up a lot with practice. And so I have found with men who would say they're self-described, highly analytical, highly rigid, highly emotionally controlled people, coupled with often on times on sleeping medications, they often need a higher than typical microdose to connect with the medicine. So if I see and hear all those factors, some of those factors, or sometimes all of those factors, that's a case where I would typically start them at a higher microdose than I might start someone else. Lots of time, if someone is on a sleeping medication, we'll actually start them with Amanita rather than psilocybin to begin with. Yep. Amanita is a really beautiful medicine, and typically we have lots of podcast episodes on Amanita you can dive into, but that's a little different than psilocybin in that we often recommend Amanita for 30 days straight, every day for 30 days, oftentimes longer. And depending on if they care to wean off of the sleeping meds or not, will kind of help them determine if that's what they choose to do. The way I have come to view that is often nervous system dysregulation that turns into anxiety that because of their emotional repression and control, it can only come out in their sleep, right? They need to kind of keep it together during the day for their career and at work and the identity that they're holding in their day-to-day life, and then they can't sleep at night. And that's what starts the cycle of medication. Whereas like women, it'll kind of come out in all these other manifestations. It seems to impact older men that way and impacting their sleep. On the other side, of all of my clients, when people ask me like, who has the best results? Who has the most remarkable results? I'm like, women over 70. Hands down, hands down. I would say like women postmenopausal in general, but like particularly I've worked with so many women over 70 who have had long histories of contemplative practice and healing practice and artists and creatives. And they're kind of like, I've done all the things. I don't know if I can experience that much more. And then they microdose and they're like, oh boy, oh boy, that really kind of lifted the ceiling off completely of my creativity and my intuition and my instinct and my connection to spirit. So I think there's something very special about like postmenopausal women. The veil has been thinned greatly. And then you add mushrooms to that and it can be truly remarkable. So those are my reflections on dosing. Oh, and last thing, those women over 70 oftentimes dose lower than is typical than the mainstream. I think because of that thinning of the veil, it just less medicine, they have the same effect on that. And if anything, of all the demographics I've worked with, very few times do I lessen the dose for people. We're almost always moving up. We start low, go slow, and go up. With 70 plus women, more than any other, and maybe only that demographic, we start at a certain and actually go down. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they're feeling bad. They're like, I am just like cleaning out my closets and I'm like gardening my thing. Like, and my husband's like, what is your problem? Like, settle down. Like, it's almost they have this whole new dimension open up to them and energy open up to them. And they're like, I think I could work with less. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That was just really, it's so wonderful to share, those observations you've seen over time.
And I would just say, I do a high dose macro journeys with folks, but recently on one of my own medicine journeys, you'll get a kick out of this, that I felt like the mushrooms kind of said to me, hey, we're getting all the attention, but what I want you to do is give people just a little bit of us and take them out into nature because all the other plants have stuff to say. So I'm now, there's this, you talk about, there's the microdosing, but there's also like this sort of mini dosing, which is, maybe like a gram in nature where there is so much that can come through. So just sort of put out there that this is on a spectrum of, there's high dose macrodosing where you're, behind eye shades and doing the deep dive in. There's microdosing, which is subperceptual, but still giving you great enhancement. I think there's some places in between that we can play with, that the mushrooms that we have a lot of benefit have yet to be explored.
Wonderful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Heather, let's stay with you. You read a book recently.
You wrote
a book. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah. Tell us about your book for people that are curious. What is it about? Who is it for? Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote a book. It's called, what is my book called? It's called The Psilocybin Sessions, 10 Stories of Women's Lives Transformed with Psychedelic Medicine. Basically, I love public speaking. I believe in the art of storytelling to really bring insight and awareness to topics. So I have worked with, probably journeyed over 500 women and have witnessed and held space for these amazing, amazing healings. And it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about people's own inner healing intelligence and what comes up and how these healings come about in a language that is unique to that person's worldview and soul and spirit. So these stories were just so amazing. And I'm so honored to have held space for them. And I was telling the stories over and over again, not disclosing who anybody was, but just telling the woman who lost her 2-year-old to cancer, the woman who lost her only child to fentanyl, the woman who got out of a narcissistic abusive relationship, the woman whose mother died in front of her when she was 10. These are people I held space for and saw these amazing healings. And somebody said, why don't you put them into a book? And I thought, oh, well, there's an idea. So the book is a collection of just short stories, real stories of ordinary women's extraordinary experiences on plant medicine. The goal being just so that people can read these stories and get a sense and a feel of what it's like to do a high dose psilocybin journey. And I'm not pushing it. It's here's the stories. Here's what it can look and feel like, which was a bit of a challenge to put these, ethereal, non-ordinary states of consciousness into language, especially when it wasn't even my journey, to try to translate that. But I hope I did it with some grace and some, well articulated. Lauren wrote one of the advanced praises for my book, and so it's just my little gift to the space. And I'm the first, therapist who's written a book that is stories of collections of stories of real clients, real healing. So that is what I hope is my contribution to the space.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We'll also put the link in the show notes to purchase the book as well. Yeah, for sure. So one of the edges that I see in our training when new guides are coming into the field is they think they need to stop who they were before to become a microdosing guide, right? And what I have seen so clearly is when you come into a relationship with the medicine, you realize, oh my gosh, okay, the medicine was preparing me. In my previous life that was so different, it was preparing me to bring the medicine forth in my unique way, in my unique dharma. And so Cesar, I've been watching him grow in the field, and it's like he brings all of his experience from CNN, connecting people, telling stories. I mean, I know it's an apparel company, but it's really like a media platform for mushrooms, which I so love. And it's like promoting the story of mushrooms and the people experiencing healing through this work. So I'd love for you to share about cultivating wisdom and kind of how it came about.
No, thanks so much, Casey. I appreciate that because, and Heather said earlier, it might sound woo-woo, right? It might sound hippie-ish, but it's sort of, the mushrooms asked me to do this. The mushrooms said, hey, take your skills that you've learned at CNN, your storytelling skills, your production skills, your engagement skills, your storytelling skills, that before you used behind the camera, and now get in front of the camera. Get in front of the camera and now share your story. You share your honest story. Just be vulnerable and tell your story of how these things have changed you, and change how you've used these to better your life. And it was funny because through cultivating wisdom all started very uniquely. It started with, obviously, I'm still working at CNN. Psychedelics come into my life. I go from literally hiding my substance abuse with the cannabis at CNN to openly talking to people. I'm microdosing. I'm using psilocybin, and people are like, "What are you talking about? Like, what are you crazy?" Like, and I'm like, "No, seriously. I took some mushrooms this morning with intentions to sort of have a great day, to have great shows." And they're like, "Yeah, wait a minute, this looks awesome." And it was my desire to have these conversations, right? That I was like, "Oh, you know what? I'd love to have a shirt that talks about microdosing, or that talks about psychedelics." And of course, everything was very trippy or very psychedelic-ish or very tie-dye, and that's where the idea of, let's start an apparel brand that can start conversations, right? That if I wear a shirt that says microdosing on it, that maybe someone comes up and says, "Oh, you microdose? I've heard about that. I've read about that. Can you cultivate me with some wisdom?" So it all started with that, right? With having these conversations, right? There's people who were using these molecules, these substances responsibly, and they're using it for healing, and they're using them for optimization. And some of them are using to be more creative or be more empathetic or just be better human beings. So for me, the mushrooms were always like, have these conversations openly, talk about it every day. You know what I mean? Share, because yes, you're going to talk to 5 people. 2 of them are going to say hippie, stoner, druggie, you're crazy, you're going to go to a loony bin, forget about it. You're not my problem. I can't talk to you anymore. You do drugs. Okay. 2 people are going to say, wait a minute, hold on a second. You poked at my childhood curiosity here about these things being used for depression and anxiety, for healing, for optimization. But we're going to have that one person is going to say, wait a minute, hold on a second. This is what I've been looking for. This is what's been calling me. I needed to hear this message. And that's, I think, where we changed. And that's, for me, that's where I love that I was able to use it 25 years, at CNN. And I'm incredibly grateful for the time I was there, even though I was laid off. You know what I mean? But it's just a business. But I'm grateful that then the mushroom said, no, don't worry about it. We're going to turn you around. And now we're going to have these conversations, and you're going to openly talk about them. So Casey, again, thank you. And I've followed you also, and seen you grow, and seen Lauren grow, and Heather, I've tapped into you here, there. And like I said, now what you're doing with Lisa Ling, it's so amazing for me to see that we've all created these platforms to have these honest, open, and objective conversations about psychedelics, which 10 years ago would be like, are you crazy? There's no way that's going to happen. There's no way there's going to be a conference about psychedelics. There's no way that someone's going to be writing a book about, and here we are. I mean, I think it's really important. I think it's really important, the work that each one of us is doing in our own little niche, in our own little realm, in our own little conversation starting that we're having, in our own little stories that we're telling. It's incredibly important, because we don't know who we can touch. We don't know whose life we're going to change.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. I know I only have you for a few more moments. So in closing, I would love to open the floor to each of you to share what your vision is for the field. Like, I always love to people, like, if you had your magic wand and you can wave it, like, how would you love to see the field develop from here? And also, please share with listeners how to find you. Heather, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge paradigm shift, that this medicine is so powerful in helping in the mental health space. But I also really think there's a place for this medicine in the wellness conversation. And I would love psilocybin work, medicine work, psychedelic medicine work to find its place alongside meditation and yoga and sound baths. I mean, I think this is something that we can do once or twice a year for our own alignment of body, mind, and spirit. So I would hope that it evolves in a way that this becomes part of a broader just wellness and self-care conversation, not just for disorders, disease, mental, whatever. I think there's a place for it on this whole spectrum of wellness. And where people can find me at heatheralee.com. So that's my website, and on there is the book. And if anybody ever needs a public speaker, I'm always looking for a gig. So, yeah.
Thank you. Lauren, how about you?
Well, that's a really big question. And I like to say that, I've only been in this space for a couple of years, and I came from that lens of mindfulness, and it really just shocked me how many different stakeholders there are within the psychedelic space. You know, some people are going to want it to be medicalized, and there are a lot of people who are more shamanic or plant medicine based, and there's so many people underground that, you know, aren't even part of the conversation above ground. And so, you know, legalization in some states, how it's looking in some others. In Vermont, you know, it might end up going the medicalized route, which means that people like my husband won't be able to have access. But what I do see happen, so I believe that, you know, as Cesar just said, this is like, if you look back 10 years ago and where we are now, it's astonishing. I can't imagine what it's going to look like in 10 years from now. But what I can say is most of those stakeholders are all going to grow. And so everybody's going to find their place in this big, messy, sometimes very messy area. But what I do hope, and I haven't really contemplated this as much, it's a great question, Casey, is that everybody can have access to this medicine in the ways that are really respectful to the medicine and respectful to themselves. And that would be my biggest hope.
Beautiful. Thank you. And your website, Lauren?
So my name is Lauren Alderfer. That's the name of my website, laurenalderfer.com. And I am on Instagram and also on LinkedIn. And my books are available on Amazon in Canada and indigo.ca, anyhow, Amazon throughout the world. But you can go to my website and find all my offerings, which include the blog that really does navigate the story that we're still living with my husband and me as a caregiver, him with Alzheimer's, microdosing, and I will say other psychedelics and other doses of psychedelics that have helped. And I have some mentorship and courses and free information, particularly for caregivers, that's available on my website. And again, like Heather, the three of us just spoke at the psilocybin conference, where I actually ended up speaking on the newest research for psilocybin and other psychedelics for Alzheimer's specifically. So I see myself more and more in this platform, speaking out. And I know we're closing, but what Cesar was saying before is like, and Casey, I think all of us, I love the word authentic. Like we are sharing from a deep place of our own authentic lives that are lived. And I think that's really the space that I see continually to grow. And we're going to see, you know, whether we call them stakeholders or not, it's like, if we can share our lived experience and how these medicines, these plant medicines, fungi has helped us in our own lives, I think that's the biggest place that we're just going to see this grow and grow. And that's one of my biggest hopes, that we just keep these voices, these real lives being lived, and sharing of those lives is what I see just in the next 10 years, just multiplying like the mycelial network of the mushrooms themselves.
May it be so. Love it. Cesar.
So many beautiful things said there by both Lauren and Heather, and where this is going. For me, it's the hope of more honest conversations. It's the hope of more mainstream household names who have relationships with these molecules, having these conversations so that more people are open to it. I want to see more honest, open conversations with therapists, whether they're saying, hey, you know what, I've heard about this. It's not that I could recommend it, but maybe you should look into this and this might help. I think that for me, because we live in a world of capitalism, and eventually, I mean, look at what happened with cannabis. For me, my biggest hope is that there's more people who are working in this space who are manifesting what I call love you wealth, right? Which is, as long as I have what I need, I can use the rest of it to see who else needs, instead of people who are manifesting FU wealth, right? Which that could sort of be the potential also of this. So for me, it's just a hope that we do this the right way, that we do this, like I talked about earlier, with love, that we're using these to help people, to better humanity, to better the society that we live in, because we really do need that. We really do need more love in the world. And if somehow through these molecules we can find that love, then for me, that is the North Star. People could find me on Instagram, which is cultivating.wisdom. There's a link tree in there. which you could find my LinkedIn and my free ebook that I have, which is literally a kid's book for adults on what microdosing is. So have some fun with that. And the apparel brand is cultivatingwisdom.net. It's just a good way to start these conversations. Whether you want to wear a shirt that's got the molecule to LSD and it says, I love Lucy, or whether a shirt that says much love, it's again, having these conversations that we can have, whether it's opening it up to the other members of the community or that curiosity, that person who's curious and just doesn't know who to ask, or can't ask at home, or can't ask at work, or can't ask a neighbor. If you're wearing a shirt and they can come up and have a conversation with you, I think that's a good start for all of us.
Oh, love you guys. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your hearts and wisdom. Appreciate all of you so much. So thank you all for listening. Those of you who are there in the little screens, we will see you back in just a couple weeks. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Much love, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Ready to take the next step? Please visit us online at microdosingforhealing.com. There you'll find lots of information about our global community, professional training programs, and upcoming immersions. See you there.